So I'm going to upload this video and talk a little bit further about why I think the Land Rover 300 TDI, or what I like to refer to it as the gentleman's tractor, is the greatest apocalypse vehicle. Now, before I start talking about the diesel Land Rover Defender, let me further explain the parameters and why I'm using and what I'm using to justify my opinion. You know, what is an apocalypse vehicle? It could mean a lot of different things to various people, but for this scenario, I want to talk about, kind of the typical, what you would see in movies or in TV series. You always notice the protagonist in the vehicle, is driving a very heavily modified one, or they're just a million out on the road that have been abandoned and no longer work for one reason or another. This scenario usually occurs months or years after the respective catastrophe. So let me break this down a little bit more into a few key scenarios to highlight why a vehicle like a Defender is so useful. Now, in the first scenario, let's say something happens where the population is dramatically reduced to the point where there is no real infrastructure. All that's left is what is abandoned in time, or in that particular time of the event. In this scenario, for the next few months, or even up to a year or so, there will be still, vehicles that can run. Someone should be able to at least get to some vehicle with a battery that is good enough charge to get it started and running. There should be gasoline that's still good, it hasn't perished, to run an engine. But after that period, let's say 2 to 4 years, or oftentimes a lot less, maybe like 6 months, but pretty much all vehicle batteries will have depleted to the point where they're no longer able to receive a charge. They can't be maintained because they've depleted below the point where a positive charge can be thrown at it. On top of that, gasoline does go bad. It expires and then becomes unusable in an engine. Think about starting your lawnmower or any sort of thing or a motorcycle that is sat for a season. At 3 years, it's turned into basically a gel or a shellac. Now, after 4 years of a decaying infrastructure, most roads will begin to fall apart. Foliage and other natural debris will take over, and you will need a vehicle to be able to navigate around that. So just after a few years, batteries are now useless, fuel is unusable, gasoline, road conditions are seriously compromised. Another thing to consider is what's called an EMP blast. Now, an EMP is an electronic or an electric magnetic pulse. It's a shockwave caused when something like a nuclear bomb is detonated above ground. They sometimes call that a dirty bomb too. Beyond the physical destruction this obviously causes, these explosions also pretty much wipe out any microchip in the affected area. So what's a microchip? Most of you know, but just to clarify, it's not just in cell phones and computers, but it's pretty much in everything, including any vehicle made in the last decade, if not more. Now, in this scenario, even if you have plenty of fuel and a fully charged battery, any vehicle that was in range of an EMP will be completely inoperable. So let's recap. In an event which causes an abominant or a horrible infrastructure problem, batteries will deplete within a few years, gasoline will expire and become basically useless, and roads will become so bad that driving on them with a normal car will be virtually impossible. Alongside that, if said event is caused by an EMP, 99% of vehicles will become inoperable immediately after that. So what kind of vehicle do we need? We need something that can run without a battery. The fuel has a longer shelf life than gasoline, can handle bad road conditions, and for the EMP scenario, does not have any vital circuitry to run it. So there are no microchips that would keep it from running. So let's begin with the battery. So for a vehicle, to start, it needs something to, initialize the cranking of the motor. Be that a starter that's connected to a battery, or in a gear that's rolling forward, or anything else to get the rotation of the engine fast enough that it'll work on its own. If you can remember, old airplanes, people would stand in front of the propeller and just get it started in the beginning. And early cars, people would actually have like a crank or some sort of thing that would go into the front of the motor, and you could push, crank it over and it would start. So in its most basic use, the 12-volt battery of a vehicle has one main objective: to initialize the run procedure. You put the key in, you turn it over, and in its most basic form, the key sends battery power to a small electrical motor, the starter, to engage the solenoid to crank over the vehicle. At that point, the battery essentially sits back and gets recharged from the new source of electricity, which is the alternator. Vehicles with manual transmissions or gearboxes can replace the starter and battery by engaging the engine from the motion of the wheels turning. So prop it up on a hill, put it in second gear or whatever gear you need, and with that motion, with that moving motion, you can, release your foot from the clutch and it'll crank over on its own. Talking about now part 2, talking about fuel, gasoline is volatile. It wants to evaporate. So because of that, it needs to be in a container that's sealed. It's also very dangerous because the vapor is, clearly extremely flammable. Now, on top of that, gasoline deteriorates after a relatively short period of time. And it becomes even more useless when ethanol alcohol is mixed, because ethanol is hygroscopic. It wants water is attracted to it. Now, number 3, the bad roads. A vehicle that can handle imperfect road conditions is necessary. You want something that is up off the ground and go over curbs, handle uneven surfaces, and has as much traction as possible. In other words, you want a four-wheel drive vehicle with big tires. Now, with the EMP, this is the most difficult part. To find a vehicle that does not have any electronic components that can be damaged because of an EMP blast forces us to look for something manufactured decades ago. You need to find something that does not have any microchip that can impede the starting and running process of the vehicle. In conclusion, an apocalypse vehicle should be able to run without a battery, have fuel that will last and can be easily transported, handle bad terrain, and have no electronics. Now, under that setting, under those 4 key things, having not needing a battery, having alternative fuel over gasoline, handle bad roads, and not have any circuitry, is my argument why the Land Rover Defender, the early Defender, the 300 TDI, or even the 200 TDI is the best vehicle. It's a manual transmission or gearbox. You can put it in second gear and it'll start on a hill. The fuel is diesel, which is not volatile, which means it won't evaporate. It's akin to cooking oil. So it can even run on cooking oil if needed. And so the fuel will last a lot longer and it doesn't have to be in an absolutely sealed container. So it's more forgiving. It can obviously handle bad roads because it has it's four-wheel drive and it's up off the ground. And it can handle an EMP blast or survive an EMP blast because there's no mechanical components to keep it from running. Now, on top of those 4 key factors for my argument for the Land Rover Defender, it also has a whole bunch of different options that you can, adapt and make better for those sorts of scenarios. One of which is that first of all, the vehicle is pretty thin compared to, a typical American vehicle or a big American pickup truck. So it can get in and out of certain areas more easily. It also has a transfer case that's built for an option to be able to adapt any sort of, accessory. So be it like a hydraulic pump or to connect. So in a scenario, you could connect like a generator to it relatively easily, and you can connect a few other things. So you have an engine that can not only move you around, but it can also be connected to be a hydraulic pump or move or a larger generator for a home. It's also has the benefit of allowing you to it's got disc brakes all around, which are a lot easier to modify and to make work when there's an emergency or to pinch off compared to drum brakes. All 4 corners have springs, coil springs instead of leaf springs, which makes it you can adapt a spring onto a vehicle much more easily than a leaf spring. The emergency brake or the hand brake on it locks up the differentials. So it's a mechanical lock versus a friction lock that occurs when you have a drum brake when you lock it up with the emergency brake. So long as you have one wheel with traction, you pull the emergency brake and it'll hold you to where you need to be. So that, along with a bunch of other, I think, things that I'm sure I forgot, makes the Defender, I mean, one of the greatest apocalypse type vehicles. Now, in other parts of the world, I would say a Toyota Hilux would be incredible. There are a few other, in Brazil, I think it's called the Bandeirantes, which is like an FJ version, which is a diesel. But you want something that's got no electronics, gets you off the ground, 4x4. Um, it's got a manual transmission, and it runs on diesel fuel.